Hello, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson. And today we are doing something a little bit different. I am welcoming Febronia Ruocco to our podcast as a guest. And she is going to be talking to us about her own experiences of communication and culture in her very varied career in insights, in marketing, and more recently as a mentor and as a coach. So Febronia, a really warm welcome to the podcast. It's brilliant to have you here.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's wonderful to be here. I'm so excited. I followed your podcast journey and have loved all your episodes. So it's a real treat to be here with you today.
Well, thank you. And I obviously have known you for many, many years from our time together in marketing. But we also then discovered we were at the same university as well. So I'm going to start with a question, which is about how communication has been important to you throughout your life.
That is a great question. And if I stop and reflect, I think it started when I was a child because my parents were both from Italy, from the Amalfi Coast. So at home, we always spoke Italian. So I was brought up in an environment speaking Italian. My dad would tend to switch into English, but my mum was primarily always speaking in her regional Neapolitan dialect, which is beautiful as well. And so I was always very interested. And then as I got older and understood at school, now we speak English. I was, growing up in two linguistic worlds. And that passion then followed me right through O levels and A levels. I loved languages, did French and German, went on to university to do French, German, and Italian. And took it from there. So I think it's really from the beginning. And then also going on holidays to my grandparents, to my nonna in Italy, and hearing and living and speaking in Italian full time. I mean, that was a real cultural experience too. So I think that's where the passion started.
Amazing. And I can imagine that must have been so interesting to be bilingual and then eventually trilingual across these languages. So did you spend quite a bit of time living in those different countries then?
I haven't lived in Italy. I've spent lots of time there, lots of holidays when I was a child, but then also as a student, I spent prolonged periods with my aunt in Verona. She was helping me with my studies. But I have lived and worked in France, and I have lived and worked in Vienna. So I have had experiences in the German and French speaking cultures and business worlds, if you like.
Yes, indeed. And what were those kind of cultural nuances that you noticed? So when you were, obviously you've worked a long time in the UK, but also working in France and working in Austria, you said. So what were those kind of cultural norms or things that you noticed when you were working in these different places?
And I'll do my best not to stereotype here. I'll try not to stereotype. But in Austria, for example, people are very respectful of titles, so academic titles. So even in a working environment, you're given your full title and are addressed as Miss or Mrs. With your academic letters following your name. So that was one thing that I realized, the importance of status and importance of recognition of titles. In the south of France, quite laid back. And I guess this is because of the heat in the summer. So one of the cultural differences I realized there, that even in the business world, there was a great recognition of lunchtime, that you need a couple of hours out to eat, relax, get a bit of sun. And I noticed in the office, for example, that there was a few hours in the afternoon where nobody was there, and nobody had told me about this this way of doing things. And I was like, where are you all going? And they're like, we're going swimming, it's so hot. And then they'd come back late in the evening, sort of 6 o'clock onwards, and do a couple of hours work. So adapting to the climate, that was very interesting. And in Italy, there's just a passion and zest for life, food, clothes, passeggiata, going for your walks in the evening, is a real way of life. But I think in Italy, the one thing I have really noticed is people tend to speak their regional dialects, but then when in a formal environment, they switch to High Italian.
Oh, that's
So,
interesting.
yeah, so
Mm.
in a working environment, you'd speak High Italian, but then when you go home to your family, you'd speak the dialect of your parents or your your family at large where you're living. So that
Mm.
switch. So with Italian, I kind of feel that I've learned two languages, the Neapolitan
Interesting.
dialect and then the High Italian at university.
Wow. Wow. You summarized that really well, considering there's obviously a lot of differences, but it's interesting what you
Mm,
noticed about Austria. I know that I noticed that myself when I was working.
mm,
I didn't live in Germany, but I was traveling quite regularly to Germany when I was
mm,
working in marketing in my first career. And I noticed that formality, that sense of almost personal distance between people as well. That actually, that there was a formality of being at work and the names that we called each other and how people interrelated with each other. There was a real separation, certainly in the context I was working in, between professional and personal. So that was
that's
something
so
I noticed.
interesting. That is
Yeah.
so interesting because I'm now wondering, thinking back, did it actually enhance our communication and relationships, or does it set a distance that prevents you from getting too close? I don't know. I think at the time,
Mm.
you just go with it, don't you? So at the time, I went with it, and I think it did kind of make you respectful of your seniors, but also they respected you with your title. So there were positives and pros and cons, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing. I mean, when I suddenly talk about cultural values with the people that I work with, for me, it's really kind of acknowledging there is no sort of good and bad in this. There's actually no
Mm.
kind of right or wrong because it's just difference. It's just different ways of being, different ways of interacting. And it's so interesting because it can get quite easy to put these judgments and labels on them in terms of, well, that's not how we would do it. But it doesn't mean it's wrong, right?
No, not at all. And I think, even in my work today, working with developing markets in India and Africa, it's so varied and colorful, and the cultural nuances are what makes every day exciting getting out of bed to work on projects. And I
Mm.
learn so much from these individuals about their regions, their food, their ways of doing things. It's truly fascinating. And I think being curious and staying curious, and like you say, not putting judgments on things or putting things in boxes, it's a really enriching experience because, it's what makes the world such an interesting place.
Absolutely. So let's talk about more about what you've been doing in your career more recently, and also talk about, so because obviously the listeners are not familiar. So do you want to explain what you've been doing most recently with India, with Africa, and why?
Well, in the last few years of my insight career, I've worked with countries like Spain, some parts of Asia, more recently working in Africa and with India. I worked with India many years ago as well when I was in the alcohol category. Um, so it's more of a continuum. I don't think what I'm doing now is any different to what I've done all along, but I think leading projects which are working with cross-cultural teams, different levels of seniority, driving the insight agenda into the heart of the business. So we create marketing mix, which is consumer driven. But really understanding the cultural differences and nuances can be very important when you're trying to roll out global product or trying to create
Mm.
new product development for specific market territories. So that's been consistent throughout my career and something that I'm really passionate about and love. But adding to that, I've also been mentoring and developing executive coaching skills, which I'm
Wow.
hoping to take into different markets as well.
Amazing, amazing. I'm really keen to hear more about the coaching and the mentoring, but just coming back to the marketing a minute,
Yeah.
because I can imagine how critical communication is when you are the insights lead and you're working with many different markets and you've got lots of different stakeholders involved within marketing, senior directors. So, how have you managed that? Because that's kind of quite challenging sometimes. Sometimes it's not easy to balance what everybody wants and needs and to be able to communicate effectively with all those different stakeholders.
It's hugely challenging, and I can't
Mm.
sit here and say it's always a great success. There are days when I think, oh my gosh, I've still got so much to learn and to do. You never stop learning, but I think there are lots of challenges, and recognizing them is a first step. So, for example, being mindful that not everybody has the same level of English, which you talk about a lot in your podcast. So thinking about how I communicate when I'm asking for specific things, to be slow, to be clear, to be simple in my choice of words, so that everybody has possibility of understanding. And if I notice that maybe somebody hasn't understood, maybe checking in with them outside of the meeting and making sure they're up to speed, being sensitive to how people feel, because, as you point out again in a lot of your podcasts, we all want to speak perfectly. We all want to present ourselves perfectly and professionally, but agility is key in the communication. So I'm also very mindful of that, and very supportive and encouraging, and always tell people your English is so good, because it really is. They're working in dynamic, complex environments with complex projects in a language that's not their own. And having experienced that myself, I know how difficult it is and what added pressure it is. I think as well, thinking about the different types of language. So we've got the basic English communication between us, but then we've got the knowledge of marketing. So that's an additional layer of complexity. So are we all using the same marketing terms? Are we all talking about the marketing projects in the same way? Or because, a concept to one person might be a very different concept in the mind of another. So do you mean an idea? Do you mean a fully written concept? Do you mean the bones of a concept, the sort of skeleton of one, or do you mean a fully fledged? So you have to be really mindful of what are individuals understanding by these terms, and are they understanding the same thing? So you've got that complexity too.
Amazing. I love that. So if I just summarize that, because I think there's three really powerful points. So one is about you as a kind of person who actually has English as your first language, sort of taking responsibility and slowing down language, being clear, making sure that others really do understand you, even if they do say that they do, maybe they don't. They're not feeling comfortable to say they don't. And then the second thing I heard you talk about there, which I found was really, really important, was just about encouraging others, recognizing that it's not easy to communicate in a language that isn't your first language, that actually there are confidence challenges sometimes. And I absolutely see this with the clients and the people I work with, that even if they don't say it, there is sometimes those doubts and feelings of almost imposter syndrome around actually being able to express themselves well. And the third point, oh my goodness, I literally escaped my mind, but you were definitely talking about the marketing jargon. Sorry, that I really wanted to thank you for reminding me, because that really struck me. Actually, we've got the communication at the level of business level. We've got the communication of understanding the company language and what goes on at the company. Because I found every time when I was working in marketing, I changed company. Every company had a different acronym, a different word for something. And I was like, does that mean that?
Yes.
And then, as you say, even down to the kind of department level, marketing, in this example, it's amazing how much jargon and acronyms there can be around different areas, right? And it can be so confusing.
It can. And there's another level as well, which I've become more aware of since doing my coaching, and also since doing my mental health first aider. And that's about how we communicate nervous system to nervous system.
Oh, tell me more about it. I don't know that, actually.
And I'm still at the very beginnings of this journey, because it's so complex and understanding it more. But basically, our nervous system has various states. And when we are in a good place of social connection, we are able to cognitively function better. So now I'm very comfortable with you, and I'm enjoying the conversation. We're socially connected, even though it's via hybrid, it's, via virtual. So our nervous systems are co-regulating. I'm responding to your questions, you're responding to my thoughts and reflections, and we're both communicating in partnership. So that is something we want to instill when we're communicating in business. We want people to feel safe. We want them to feel that their opinions matter, that they're being listened to, and that their nervous system is able to connect with our nervous system. So we've all had that boss that we feel intimidated by, right?
Yeah.
And that's where our nervous system felt a little bit nervous and agitated. And you can probably remember that you may have been in situations where you fluffed your words, or you thought, why did I say that? Why am I not responding in a way that reflects me as a professional? And that's because you get activated, because you don't feel safe.
Wow. I think my face literally just then on the video, you'll see this. I was like, oh my goodness, this is such an amazing, powerful insight. I love that idea that there's something really at that nervous system level physically that's going on when we are socially connected.
Absolutely.
That really blows my mind, because actually that really says something which I think I've always known or felt inside, that connection is more than what we're saying to each other. It's deep in our hearts, actually. It's deep in what we are trying to connect, human to human, ultimately.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. That is something that really...
It's deep in the brain. It's deep in the limbic system, because your brain is designed to keep you safe. So if an individual, if you feel that you're not connecting, there could be a number of reasons, but your nervous system is picking that up at a subconscious level. It's warning you, be careful here. You might need to think what you say or how you react, or what, because you don't feel intuitively safe. So knowing that in business, if you're working with individuals who are feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome, they could feel a little bit threatened by your requests. So being gentle, using soothing tones, using open body language, being receptive can help calm them down. And by calming them down, they're able to think better and they're able to perform better. So it's all a chain of events.
Wow, that's fantastic. And so that's what we can do if we think somebody's experiencing this, that they are feeling perhaps not that connection, their nervous system is feeling threatened. What about if we feel it ourselves? Because some of the listeners who are listening to this might experience that and be going, yes, I get that. I feel the fear or the shift or the nerves when I'm in this situation. Sometimes for some of my listeners, that might be about presenting or standing up and public speaking. For others, it might be people and context specific. So you talked about senior managers, or it could be an external customer who's quite tough. So do you have any tips around this, about calming the nervous system and being able to therefore communicate and connect better and ultimately perform better?
Well, there's lots of books written on this, and there are specialists like Stephen Porges who wrote about polyvagal theory, and he talks about the 3 steps of the nervous system. So sympathetic, ventral vagal, and dorsal, those states. And I won't go into all of that detail here, but basically the middle state, ventral vagal, is when we're in a good place for connection and we're calm and centered. There are tools that you can use, like breathing techniques, slowing down, taking a step back, reminding yourself that you're safe cognitively, but the body needs to feel safe. So it takes a little bit of training to understand. And also, I think something else that ties into this is being able to self-advocate, because if you go into a state where you don't feel connected, we may shrink a little bit in size and feel that we can't express our needs. But if we're able to self-advocate and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Could you explain it again? Or I'm sorry, I need to take time out. I'll be back in a few minutes. Or something that gives you that space you need to recalibrate your nervous system and your breathing. Because you might get sensations in the body like your heart might pump a little faster, your breathing might become a bit more shallow. So being able to recognize that and knowing, what do I need to self-soothe?
That is fantastic. Thank you so much for those tips. I know that I will take those on board, and I'm sure our listeners will find that really useful for those situations when they are feeling those nerves kind of kicking in. I think the other thing that I'm always kind of keen to share with people is that it's actually sometimes very normal to feel like this. So everybody experiences this, no matter how confident they seem, no matter how together they seem in their communication. Actually, my experience, what I find to be true, is that it doesn't matter. Everybody goes through it at some point, whether it's been in the past at a different level, or they face a new challenge, a new situation, a bigger audience, a bigger room that they're presenting to, a more tough audience to talk to. I find that there is always that sense of growing and development in this area.
That's so interesting. And building on that with this understanding of the nervous system, that energy is required to motivate and galvanize us into action. So if you're feeling the flutters or the voice change a little bit before a presentation, it's your body releasing adrenaline to get you going. So then you probably can recall where you started a presentation and you felt a little bit nervous, and then after a few minutes you calmed right down and were right in it. And that's because your nervous system then settles down. So learning to work with our nervous system and the way it's communicating with us, and this is what's so fascinating about communication on this level, is that it's actually guiding us. It's keeping us safe at all times.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And we'll put a link in the show notes to that book, because I think that would be really useful to kind of as a follow-up for some of our listeners today. I want to talk to you about communication agility, because I know that's something you are also very interested in. It's a very core philosophy to how I work with people, in having the flexibility to express yourself in different ways at different times. So I'm kind of curious whether you've had a time maybe recently where you felt that communication agility was important to you, and how, what does that mean to you? You know, how are you approaching this idea of communication agility?
I think if I reflect on when I was younger, so for example, at university, it was all about perfectionism. It was all about passing your tests, speaking in an oral exam, getting as much of it correct, grammatically correct, phonetically correct, linguistically correct. But real life isn't like that. Real life is full of other things going on. So when I actually started to live in France, or I lived in Austria, I realized, oh my God, I've studied German and French for all these years, but I don't actually know how to speak it. So then I realized that people don't speak in a grammatically correct way. If you think about when we're speaking with our friends in English, we're using slang, we're using jargon, we're using colloquialisms of the day, trendy words. So being agile for me is all about being able to be understood and to communicate regardless of whether we're speaking in a grammatically correct way or not.
That is fantastic. And I am laughing because I equally studied languages and had exactly the same experience of wanting to kind of like pass and get great grades and exam results, but then actually went to live in these countries and realized very quickly that I couldn't actually speak them. It was quite interesting. And equally, sometimes I do have people who come to me and they say things like, you know, I just need to learn, I need to extend my professional vocabulary, or I need to tune up my grammar. And I always just have a conversation around this and we explore, because I often feel like with the kinds of people who I'm usually working with, they already are using English every single day in their work. So I'm kind of always say to them, I'm not sure that's going to make the big difference. That's going to give you like a 0.005% impact on what you're doing, on your communication. And that's where I love, you know, this idea, and that I know you connect with, about communication agility, because it's just, it helps people reframe it, right? And, you know, we don't all have to be TED speakers. Maybe somebody who's listening to this does want to be, and that's brilliant, but we don't all have to be. Certainly, I think the other thing that I always say is, you know, you don't have to be a TED speaker every single day. I'm sure when the person who's a TED speaker walks off the stage, they probably have their bad days when they're speaking.
Absolutely. And I don't mind admitting this, but I'm in my 50s now. And when I think I've had over 50 years of speaking Italian, do I speak it perfectly? No, there's still lots of words I don't know. There's still grammar that I get fluffed up. But am I able to communicate? Am I able to present in Italian? Am I able to have a communication with someone in Italian? Am I able to write an email that is, on the whole, understood? Yes. So I do speak Italian, but I'm not a perfect speaker of Italian, even though I'm of Italian origin. So it's being kind to yourself and recognizing what your skills are and actually enjoying the whole communicating and having fun with it. Letting go of that need to be, perfect, because none of us are perfect.
No, absolutely. And I love the idea of having fun. At the end of the day, this is what it's about, right? That's, I kind of think it's better to speak and communicate rather than to hold back and not say anything. I think that's the sad thing when people don't feel able to speak up. And that is, obviously maybe down to confidence, or some of the things we've been talking about earlier today, to do with the system and how people feel inside. Indeed. I'm going to turn the conversation to something I'm quite curious about. And I kind of appreciate you may not have the most immediate answer, but I'm quite curious because I think communication is changing. The way we communicate, the way we interact with each other. ChatGPT exploded, obviously, last November, so about almost a year ago now. And clearly AI is like evolving and rapidly going through multiple changes. How do you see the way we're communicating changing in the future? Have you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and these are personal thoughts, so I'll caveat it. I think ChatGPT is an amazing tool, and I've used it for a number of things myself, for the skeletons of writing newsletters, for looking at ways to improve my CV, things like that. For real kind of technical foundations, it can be a great asset. But it's pulling on previous data sources, so you have to be mindful that it's not the most current. So it's only, I think it only amalgamates data currently. I think it's to 2021 or 2022. I'm not sure. There's a gap between its inception to now. But I think in society, and I've noticed this even within my own circles, people are communicating less and less with words. They're using emojis on text. They're using ticks to reply. If you think about LinkedIn, how many times do we actually stop and write a comment? I mean, I know you do, and I try to do that as well, but not a lot of people actually do. A like is a kind of way of communicating their agreement, but we're losing that desire to communicate verbally and to actually express thoughts, and we're holding back more and more. And I get really frustrated when I send a lovely text to a friend and all I get back is a tick.
Yeah, do you know what? That's really fascinating how emojis are great in some ways because they shortcut. And on the other hand, they are also, ways to remove the communication. Actually, one thing I've been doing recently is actually sending more voice messages to people rather than emails or text. And I've realized that actually sometimes that's what's needed, for somebody to hear my voice or for me to express myself in my voice, to make sure my tone of voice is coming across in the way that I want it to. And actually, I'm finding that's really working for me right now. And I really take your point about, interesting, it requires a lot for somebody to comment, particularly on social media.
I love that, and that's why I love following you and listening to your work. I think I'm going to instill that in my own practice of leaving voice notes, because you're right, it just reminds the person of your desire to communicate, your expressiveness, your happiness at leaving them a message. Yeah, you're right, it's a lovely way to cut through that. But to go back to your original question, I think there is a greater need in business to make time for the social connection, because especially through hybrid, and if, like myself, you're working across international markets, so you're not physically in the geography, it's so important to take that time aside from the business to communicate. How are you? How was your weekend? How are you doing? How's the family? Because we don't have those opportunities standing by the water cooler or the coffee machine anymore. So I think if we don't take the time out to instill those moments, we run the risk of social connection erosion.
I completely agree. And I'm hearing this a lot, actually, both in the research and also in just anecdotally talking to people. I hear them talking about that social disconnection and how it requires effort to put it back in. So I think you're right, for managers and leaders, that's so important to take the lead on this, to create the social conversations.
But going back to the nervous system point, there's an
Yeah.
interesting aspect here that we all need social connection, because we need our nervous system to be in that ventral vagal state. We need it to be healthy. So when you don't have that connection, that's where you start to get isolated, and that's where you start to get anxiety and depression.
Yeah. Wow. So this is critical.
It's critical to survival of the human race in a healthy way, because we all need, we weren't created to live alone. In the prehistoric times, we all had our tribe that protected us, that kept us together, that kept us emotionally nourished. And that's the thing. Communication is not just for business or for minimal social interaction. It's to keep us biologically safe.
Yeah. So, so important. Now, Febronia, I know that you have been moving more recently into coaching, mentoring. So what's next for you?
Yeah, it's been a really exciting journey, because it all started with my niece, bless her. Hello, Madison. Give her a little shout out on your podcast.
Hello, Madison.
It was when she was doing her A-levels and university degree. I was a little bit of an anti-mentor to her. And one day she turned around and said, you know what? Students would benefit from your help. I think it might have been something I would have, thought about doing at a later stage, but she really prompted that reflection. And it's something I really enjoy, and I enjoy working with young people. I'm not a mum myself, but I love being around young people, having 5 nieces and nephews of my own. And I love the energy that they give out. I love hearing about their concerns, their interests, their joys, the whole shebang. And it's so lovely to be able to share your experiences and help an individual reflect on something, or even contribute to their growth journey. So that's been really exciting. And the mentoring started, and then that led me into coaching. I thought, let's take it up a notch.
Excellent. Wow.
So I've just completed the professional certificate in executive coaching at Henley. I'm just waiting for the certification award.
Congratulations, Febronia. That's amazing.
So hoping it's all gone well, and fingers crossed at this point. So I'm waiting for that, but I've signed up to continue my studies next year. So I'll be doing the next bit, which takes me onto the master's
Amazing.
program.
Well, that's amazing. Well, best of luck with that.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you in a minute about cultural communication confidence, because that's something I'm always really keen to get different perspectives on. But just in case somebody is interested to connect with you and ask you about either coaching, mentoring, or just generally get, some support from you from your insights world, what's the best way for them to connect with you, and how would you like people to kind of get in touch?
Anyone can connect with me on LinkedIn, send me an invite to connect, or send me a direct message. More than happy to catch up and talk about insights, or talk about coaching or mentoring. I also mentor for women in research. So if you'd like to hear more about that as well, you can contact me, and I can put you in touch with the ladies at Wire.
Fantastic. Well, we'll put your links in the show notes as well. But I'd like to end today's interview. I can't believe how it's come to an end already. But I'm quite curious. The name of this podcast is Cultural Communication Confidence. That's the name of it. And I'm curious what that means to you when I say that.
I think when I take all of my experiences together, I think about university, traveling, studies, working in different companies with different markets. For me, it's all about being able to exchange ideas and reflections with other individuals in a way that you both understand and can both make sense of the world. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be convoluted or elevated. It just needs to be a way of communication across borders.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing that and sharing everything that you shared today with me, with the listeners. I know I've learned a lot, particularly about how the nervous system works and how that helps us with social connection and how important it is. So thank you so much, Febronia. Really appreciate your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I will catch up with you soon.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, a real joy, and good luck with the future of the podcast.
Thank you so much.